Modern RPGs promise you freedom. Freedom to explore, to complete every quest, to experience everything. But after looking into the Blood of Dawnwalker, I don't think Rebel Wolves is chasing that idea at all. Because this game isn't trying to let you experience everything. It's asking you something much more difficult. What are you willing to leave behind? When people talk about player freedom, they usually mean one thing: choice. Or at least the feeling of having as many options as possible. Over the last decade, that idea has shaped almost every major RPG. Bigger worlds were only the beginning. Soon came longer quest logs, denser maps, and enough optional content to keep players busy for hundreds of hours. And for many players, that's exactly what freedom looks like. The ability to go anywhere, do anything, take your time. But the more I thought about it, the more I started wondering whether those games are actually asking players to make meaningful choices at all. Because many modern RPGs are surprisingly patient. Think about how often a game introduces an urgent problem. A village needs help, someone has gone missing, an army is marching toward the capital, and yet the world quietly waits while you spend the next 20 hours exploring caves, crafting gears, or clearing icons from the map. When you finally return, the crisis is still there. The people are still waiting. The story picks up exactly where you left it. There's a certain comfort in that design. It means you're free to experience almost everything the game has to offer in a single playthrough if you're willing to invest enough time. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Some of the greatest RPGs ever made are built around exactly that philosophy, but it also changes the nature of choice. Because if every opportunity patiently waits for you, are you really choosing between possibilities or simply deciding what to do first? And I think that's where the Blood of Dawnwalker starts becoming so interesting. Not because it's trying to give players less freedom, but because it seems to define freedom in a completely different way. I'd argue that's exactly where the Blood of Dawnwalker separates itself from most modern RPGs, because Rebel Wolves doesn't seem interested in giving players the biggest world or the longest checklist or hundreds of hours of content. Instead, almost every interview surrounding the game keeps coming back to the same idea: consequences. The developers have described the Blood of Dawnwalker as a narrative sandbox. At first, that almost sounds like another marketing buzzword, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized it perfectly captures what Rebel Wolves is trying to build. And according to the developers, the world won't simply pause while you make up your mind. Time keeps moving. If someone asks for your help, waiting isn't a neutral decision. By the time you arrive, the situation may have already changed. The people involved may have moved on. The outcome may already have been decided without you. That's a very different philosophy that most RPGs have taught us to expect. Others change depending on what you've already chosen to do. In other words, choosing one path isn't just about deciding what happens next, it's also about deciding what you'll never get to experience. That's a surprisingly rare idea in modern RPGs. Most games encourage players to see everything, to finish every quest, recruit every companion, explore every corner of the map. The Blood of Dawnwalker seems to embrace the opposite philosophy. It accepts that one playthrough shouldn't contain everything, not because content is being withheld, but because your decisions naturally close off other possibilities. That makes every choice feel heavier, not because the game tells you it's important, but because the world refuses to pause while you decide. And perhaps that's the most interesting part. The game isn't taking freedom away from the player, it's asking the player to define what freedom actually means. There's one detail that kept coming back to me while reading about the Blood of Dawnwalker. The game doesn't seem interested in punishing the player, it seems interested in making their decisions feel real. That's an important distinction, because in many RPGs, choices often create different outcomes, but they rarely create genuine laws. You might choose one ending over another, one companion over someone else, one faction instead of a rival, but eventually another playthrough can reveal everything you missed. The game quietly reassures you that nothing is truly gone. The Blood of Dawnwalker doesn't appear to offer that same reassurance. When time moves forward, opportunities disappear with it. Characters don't simply freeze in place while you explore the world. Stories continue without you. Some problems solve themselves, others don't. And that changes the psychology of decision making. Instead of asking, which option do I want, the game starts asking something much harder. What am I willing to give up? And that's a very different kind of choice, because suddenly every decision carries an opportunity cost. Imagine reaching a crossroads. One road leads to a village under attack, the other leads to someone you've spent the last 10 hours trying to find. You already know you can't reach both. Choosing one doesn't simply determine what happens there, it also determines what you'll never see on the other side of the map. Not because the game is trying to punish you, but because just like in real life, every decision carries an opportunity cost. You aren't choosing between good or bad outcomes, you're choosing between futures that can never exist at the same time. Ironically, that limitation might create a greater sense of freedom. Not because you're able to do more, but because the world finally stops revolving around you as the playable main character. For once, your choices don't just shape the story, they shape everything you'll never get to see. The world isn't reacting to your choices, it's moving with or without them. And at that point, I realized this wasn't really a discussion about the Blood of Dawnwalker anymore. It was a discussion about how we've come to define player freedom. For years, bigger worlds, longer quest logs, and endless content have become the default way of measuring freedom in RPGs. Rebel Wolf seems to be asking a completely different question. What if freedom isn't about seeing everything, but about living with the things you never will? If all of this sounds so compelling, it raises another question. Why don't more RPGs work this way? The obvious answer is that players love freedom, but I don't think that's the whole story. I think players love certainty. Completion has become part of how many players enjoy RPGs. Finishing every quest isn't just an option anymore. For many people, it's the goal. They like knowing that every quest can eventually be completed, that every companion can be recruited, that every secret can be uncovered if they're willing to invest enough time. There's a certain comfort in knowing the game will always wait for you. It means you never have to worry about making the wrong decision. You can always come back later, but there's a trade-off. When nothing is ever truly lost, it's difficult for anything to feel truly urgent. A living world shouldn't exist when the player is watching. It should continue moving whether you're there or not. That's exactly what makes the Blood of Dawnwalker such an interesting experiment. Not because it's the first RPG to feature consequences, but because those consequences appear to shape the entire story of the world rather than just the individual story decisions. Plenty of games have done that before. What's different is that those consequences seem woven into the structure of the entire experience. Time keeps moving, stories continue, opportunities disappear, not just to punish the player, but to remind them that the world exists independently of them. And that's a surprisingly bold idea in a genre that has spent years trying to let players experience everything. Perhaps that's easier for a new studio. Ripple Wolves isn't trying to protect a 20-year-old RPG formula. They have the opportunity to question it from the very beginning. Maybe that's why the Blood of Dawnwalker has caught so much attention, not because it's promising a bigger RPG, but because it's questioning one of the assumptions the genre has spent years building around player freedom. So will the Blood of Dawnwalker actually deliver on this? Honestly, I don't think we know that yet. The game is still months away, and we've only seen a small part of what Ripple Wolves is building. Maybe these systems end up feeling restrictive. Maybe they create some of the most meaningful choices we've seen in RPGs. We'll only know when the game is actually in our hands. But I don't think that's what makes the Blood of Dawnwalker so interesting. What interests me is the question it's asking. For years, we've come to associate player freedom with bigger worlds, longer quest logs, and more content. The Blood of Dawnwalker seems to challenge that idea. It suggests that freedom isn't measured by how much a game lets you do. It's measured by the weight of the choices you're forced to make instead. Because maybe real freedom isn't about seeing everything. Maybe it's about knowing you can't see everything. And if Rebel Wolves can make that philosophy work, they won't just create another fantasy RPG. They'll have challenged one of the biggest assumptions the genre has quietly built around player freedom.